Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Lawton, the Special Projects Editorial Director at SC Media, and your host for today's webcast. Welcome to today's 2020 Through the DNS Looking Glass. This webcast is sponsored by Nominet. 2020 webcasts are a production of the SC Media Editorial Department. You can think of this as a fireside chat with a subject matter expert on topics of interest to security professionals. This is not a product pitch. With that said, let's move on. Please join me in welcoming to our studios today Stuart Reed. Stuart is the VP of Products for Nominet. He spent the past 10 years focused on cybersecurity and has more than 15 years experience in roles across the across world-class brands. He's a thought leader on various areas, including managed and professional services, risk management, cybersecurity, and the cloud. He's responsible for driving Nominet's cybersecurity roadmap, both from a strategic and delivery perspective. Prior to joining Nominet, he led his own consultancy and worked for global brands such as Sony, Symantec, and NTT. There will be a Q&A following the presentation, so we do encourage you to type in any questions that you might have for Stuart via the interface. Welcome, Stuart. Let's get started. You know, there's no shortage of network security tools. For years, we've been able to slice and dice the network, finding new ways not only to secure it, but also new ways to open vulnerabilities to those whose singular goal is to defeat our best security efforts. One of the vital organs in the network is, of course, the domain name system, which maintains records on which device is doing what on the network, how often, what assets they access, and all kinds of essential data for the attacker. In today's 2020 webcast, we'll look at the state of the art of DNS security, how things are changing, and what CISOs need to know about DNS to help them sleep at night. So, Stuart, Paul Makapetris is a revered name in network technology, having invented the DNS system in 1983. DNS was created to easily identify names for IP addresses, making the Internet far more accessible for everyday use. We're talking about technology that's been with us for some 36 years now. Obviously, DNS has grown in functionality and capability, but the bottom line is that it's hardly a new technology. So what is it about DNS technology today that's still giving CISOs fits and makes it possible for attackers to penetrate our corporate networks? What's changing in the technology that keeps a CISO up at night?
Well, hi there, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me to come along. It's really interesting the comment you make around CISOs being kept awake at night. As this really actually resonates with a recent report commissioned by Nominet, as nearly a third of those that we questioned believe that in the event of a breach, they would either lose their job or receive an official warning. So, you're absolutely right. DNS is not a new technology. It's effectively a signpost to direct traffic to various parts of the Internet. And as such, fundamentally, all networks rely on it to operate normally. And I guess it's really this ubiquity that means that a huge amount of malware still relies on DNS to cause harm. Now, the ability to effectively analyze your DNS can really help here because it is a way for us to spot and prevent breaches. For example, here at Nominet, the technology that powers our NTX solution discovered the bind bug. Now, if this had been exploited, it could have caused serious disruption to the internet traffic, potentially worldwide disruption. And of course, we've all heard of WannaCry as well. Now, whilst it's no longer in the main headlines as much as it was perhaps 18 months ago, its impact still being felt today. And applying DNS intelligence means that we're able to help mitigate its impact for our customers. So essentially, DNS is a critical source of information to check for threats and also to monitor the overall health of a network. But somewhat surprisingly, it's still often overlooked in the security stack, and it really shouldn't be, because it does add tremendous value at a much earlier stage and can even help support the existing security investments that an organization has made to help add more value to the overall security stack for them.
Well, you mentioned WannaCry, and that brings up a question that I ask frequently on these webcasts. Again, this isn't a new attack, and yet we're still seeing it. It's still affecting us. It's still affecting, networks that weren't affected before. Why aren't we doing a better job of stopping this? Is it just a lack of patching the problems on a given network, or is it new networks coming online that just aren't installing the right security tools to catch the old attacks, let alone the new ones?
Well, I think it's always a case of having a blended approach to cybersecurity, and in the case of looking through DNS to help identify some of those either pre-existing or yet to actually be discovered threats, it's actually a rich source of information. And at this stage, it's probably worth pointing out that there are really two aspects to DNS here. There is the inbound, what we know is the kind of authoritative side, and this is probably what the web teams may worry about in terms of protecting their website shop front from a DDoS attack or maybe a DNS hijacking, for example. And then there's the outbound, known kind of as the recursive side, essentially. And this provides the really valuable insight for an organization's network around malware and other threats. So, whether those are pre-existing known threats or whether they are zero-day attacks, then the rich data that's actually contained within DNS is really valuable to add as part of that overall security wrapper that a CISO may consider. And it's through the volumes of the legitimate traffic within DNS where the threats can be seen, and you can see them utilizing DNS as that communication channel to cause harm.
In order to fight malware and DNS attacks, a company needs to be proactive, not reactive. We see hundreds of thousands of new malware samples every day. So what can be done at the DNS level to fight these new malware attacks? We know, for example, that attackers can hide stolen data in DNS packets. That's not new, but how else is DNS technology being used against the victim companies?
Well, you're absolutely right. The threat landscape continues to evolve, and all the time we're seeing new threats emerge and new threats coming to the fore. So, a few years ago, it was really the case that there was too much data, not enough information. Now, you fast forward to today, and we're really in a situation now where we see that there's far too much information and not enough action, as the stretched resources within the organization is trying to deal with the volumes of mitigation and remediation required to keep the network secure from growing threats. And all of this has been underlined actually through the findings of our Life Inside the Perimeter report, where almost 2/3 of CISOs, so 60% of CISOs questioned, admitted to having found malware which had been hidden on their infrastructure for an unknown period of time. And this really comes back to the point you made earlier around WannaCry, that there is still a lot within the networks that has not been discovered, and the report that we conducted really helps underline that fact. Now, because DNS is still being used as a method to cause harm in the majority of attacks, so in addition to that exfiltration you highlighted in your question, we've also see malware, we see phishing, and we can see command and control exploits through DNS intelligence as well. So, this could be advanced persistent threats, but it also could be botnets, because they too rely primarily on DNS to cause harm. And it's really where the true analysis of DNS that's important here, because it can cut through that noise and either automatically block and so eliminate that threat proactively, or alternatively it can alert those security teams to the highest priority threats within their network so that they can mitigate them, allowing both an efficient use of their available resources and also preserving the integrity of the network.
One of the problems is that companies think that their backups are going to be, the ultimate savior. Uh, they might get hit by ransomware or whatever, and so they'll restore a backup without necessarily checking to see if they're restoring, a problem that they've already defeated in the past. And that's a frustrating situation, but it happens far too often. You know, how can DNS lookup patterns or say failed real or pseudo machine generated DNS requests be used to help investigators find breaches? You know, we're looking at a lot of issues here, but what can we find in our DNS logs that can help network staffs better secure the network if only they had used the data they actually have?
Well, so you're absolutely right. Often these failed or pseudo-machine generated DNS requests result in a spike in the DNS traffic within a network. And that's really due to the repetitive and the frequent nature of those callouts. So having the ability, first off, to really have the visibility across the network to see where these spikes and where these patterns are starting to emerge is really important. So knowing what good looks like on your network and applying that kind of context to your own network allows you to see where these spikes are within the traffic flows and allows for kind of pinpointing further investigation for them. So it may be that in the example of spikes that there's simply a result of some kind of misconfiguration or mistyped web address. Or it may be that it's a precursor to some other suspicious or potentially malicious activity. And so having this early identification or early identifiers and signals at the hands of the security teams through that DNS record can be tremendously helpful for them.
We need to talk about the elephant in the room here. It seems like every time today a company is trying to get funding for new security technology, new products, whatever, it needs to be able to tell the venture capitalists, the money people, that they have some kind of whiz-bang artificial intelligence or machine learning technology, built into the product. That's obviously the hot button on Wall Street today. So let's talk about that for a bit. How is AI, how is machine learning, along with perhaps behavioral analytics and some other analytics-based technologies, helping to defend against the onslaught of new attacks against DNS technology? And similarly, how is the analysis of DNS technology being augmented by AI?
Well, it's a really good question, and I guess the first thing to say is that I'm not sure it's the elephant in the room, but you do raise a really, really good point in the fact that it is extremely important and right that both the VCs and customers challenge the claims and understand what a company means when they talk about AI or artificial intelligence. In principle, though, if it's outcomes-based and if it delivers value to the customer, it can be hugely beneficial. So of the CISOs we spoke to as part of our research, 3/4 agreed that an AI-driven approach or an artificial intelligence and augmented approach will have a positive impact on their stress levels. So we're seeing as part of our research a staggering 88% of them currently working longer than 40 hours a week. So if done correctly, AI can be massively important and add a tremendous value to an organization. I mean, if you think about the billions or potentially billions of legitimate queries passing through networks every day, the ability to spot and to identify and to block relatively few anomalies that are causing your organization harm and potentially catastrophic harm, and it really could just be one of those events that cause the harm. It's almost impossible for one person to spot that through the sea of noise of all the other billions of legitimate requests. So, applying threat feed information goes part way to addressing the issue for the known threats, but it's really the unknown where the analysis of real-time traffic and applying those algorithms derived from artificial intelligence or machine learning techniques can be an essential ingredient to help pinpoint those threats and eliminate them before they cause harm. At Nominet here, we actually go one step further than that even, and we have the ability to use our unique techniques to even predict if a newly created domain is going to be mobilized to cause harm. and we can block that proactively from the network before it even launches an attack. So the ability to proactively predict, detect, and block threats is only possible with a blended use of all of these techniques that kind of are derived from sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence applications. And they can really help cut through the noise and eliminate those threats by cutting the window of compromise to an organization and adding tremendous value to that organization and as part of the CISO toolkit.
Yeah, I'd like to take a moment here to remind our listeners that you can send your requests, any questions you have, to Stuart via the interface. We will get to as many of those at the end of the session as we can. You know, one of the CISO's biggest concerns is an attacker using valid user credentials. You know, it might be an insider gone bad or simply a user, administrator, or perhaps even a service account whose credentials have been compromised. How are today's DNS technologies identifying and stopping these real or pseudo insiders from attacking your network?
Well, there really is, as we've kind of covered in some of the earlier conversation, there's a rich source of information contained within the deep packet inspection of DNS. So that can really quickly identify any malicious activity, and this is regardless of the user type. So whether it's a legitimate user, whether it's a compromised user, whether it's an insider threat, analyzing the data flows from DNS can pinpoint the threats and can be used to take action to remediate. Now, in addition, from a kind of a post-breach perspective, DNS can really help assist the forensic or the threat hunting efforts of the organization. So, you know, either helping to identify patient zero, where it was very much an innocent victim, or to your point, it could be a rogue actor. So there is a huge amount of value within those deep packets that can help uncover the patterns that unfolded as part of that particular attack and really help those investigations from a forensic and threat hunting perspective. And you know, the detailed packet information is where a lot of that information is held for that piece. So it's really something that the CISO should really keep in mind when choosing a solution to make sure that they're capturing all of that valuable information as part of their DNS analysis.
As a follow-up, you know, how can analyzing DNS packages provide actionable threat intelligence? This is the kind of threat intelligence that companies might share through an ISAC or other intelligence sharing platform to stop potential mega attacks from bringing down our critical infrastructure. You know, here we talk an awful lot about the challenges to critical infrastructure and the sharing of data, and yet there seems to be a reluctance on the part of a lot of companies to share that data that they may have found in their DNS data.
Well, there's absolutely no question that the DNS analysis plays an active role in securing networks, and that of course includes those that support critical national infrastructure. So, you know, using shared information or available threat feeds means that the known threats can easily be identified and remediated. So blending in the outside intelligence or shared intelligence into the DNS feeds for analysis really helps to look at some of the areas that have already been identified elsewhere and quickly apply a policy to remediate those. So combining that insight along with the algorithms and analysis that looks for the currently unknown threats creates a really powerful way to pinpoint both the known and emerging attack vectors. So the kind of the shared intelligence piece is really quite important for that kind of first level understanding of all of the knowns that are out there. And then secondly, applying a level of analysis that looks for those as yet unknown or spotted attack vectors is really, really quite important. And it's, you know, because this deep analysis happens at the DNS packet layer, network staff are able to unlock the wealth of information within this and carry out immediate action when they see those suspicious or malicious behaviors. And that includes the command and control attempts that we may see, the data exfiltration as we talked about earlier, and also phishing attacks. So, you know, with DNS, security really does begin here, and it can be applied for valuable network insight and to eliminate those threats that are seen.
Generally speaking, there are three types of DNS attacks. Volume-based attacks, protocol attacks, and application layer attacks. Can you talk about ways to defend against these types of attacks? And also, how have DNS attacks changed over the past couple of years? And what should security teams be doing and looking at to enhance their defenses? Are there any types of DNS attacks that vary from the norm?
Well, there's really 2 points to make here. So firstly, where the DNS is used as a focal point of the attack. So this could include things like the denial of service attacks or DDoS or poisoning the cache to cause harm or disruption. And then secondly, where the DNS provides the vehicle to actually launch an attack. So where we see the DNS calling out from a network to complete the malicious activity, such as those command and control or data exfiltration attacks or requests. So the nature of DNS as a vehicle for attacks probably hasn't changed that much in the last few years, and we still see that many malicious attacks still utilize DNS to cause harm because really it's of its pervasive nature and the fact that it really underpins how networks talk to one another. So what really has changed, though, is the techniques that have been designed to help spot and block these threats. So whilst there have been and continue to be many point-based security solutions that look for malware, these traditionally have not been focused around DNS, and as such, that wealth of information that we've been talking about during the course of our discussion within this traffic has largely been overlooked in the security stack. So by highlighting the importance of the information and by providing value-based analysis to eliminate the threats, solutions such as the NTX solution are an effective way to help preserve the integrity of the network. And that's really by applying unique algorithms to protect, detect, and also to block those threats before they cause harm. So again, cutting that window of opportunity by applying the rich source of information that DNS provides. So, as for DNS attacks varying from the norm, well, it's probably difficult to say, though certainly the use of DNS for tunneling or exfiltration of data from the network has been seen historically, at least, as an effective way to steal sensitive data from an organization, because it's been able to kind of be under the radar or evade those normal detection methods that haven't been looking at the DNS traffic flows. So as such, it really is paramount that security teams include the DNS analysis as part of their cyber defense, because it really is an additive layer to their pre-existing security investments and helps them to understand their traffic flows and to pinpoint threats at an early stage.
I can't imagine why they wouldn't be doing that already, but I guess that's up to the companies. Again, generally speaking, the goal of DNS attacks is to take all of the proverbial air or bandwidth, as it were, out of the network. We've seen them come from nation states, from people that have political agendas, and sometimes just from troublemakers. Obviously the security team is going to want to collect forensic evidence, and you've talked about that a bit already, in order to determine where the attack originates. What are some of the actions that the team can take when a DNS attack occurs, and what advice can you give for things not to do that might impact the collection of forensic data, during the initial incident response?
Well, I guess, as we've covered, the impact of an attack that utilizes DNS can be very varied indeed. It's not just about denial of service, but it's also a way to extract information. It's a way to allow botnets to take hold and to control the network, and as a way of propagating malware and phishing attacks as well. So, in terms of using DNS as a way to conduct threat hunting, the most important point here is to ensure that the right level of detail is captured and stored. So simply looking at the top level activity is not going to be enough. To get the best from the forensic or the threat hunting assistance that DNS can offer, capturing the deep packet information is required to identify the host IPs and to look at where the attacks originated. So really, it is important that the chosen solution of the security teams allows for this. Otherwise, the ability of DNS to add value to that post-breach forensics will become slightly more limited.
Now, in the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, is increasing the adoption of many, many more privacy controls. One of those new controls will be, if it's not already required, the encryption of all DNS data. But if DNS traffic is encrypted, will analyzing the traffic, to be able to spot and stop malicious activities on the network be impacted at all? And I would think not, but I'm not certain. And how is GDPR changing the landscape of how DNS security will be done going forward?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's been a huge amount of interest and a huge amount of output as a result of the General Data Protection Regulation. So, first thing, DNS encryption hasn't yet been mandated, and though there's no question that there are changes in the appetite and approaches to privacy, one of the things that has emerged from that is the advent of DNS privacy itself. So as you say, this allows the encryption of DNS traffic from one point to another. So as a result of that as a protocol, it's really important for customers to understand what it means to them and their organization's security posture, because it's not just the legitimate traffic that can be treated this way, it's also an opportunity for malware to hide. So it's really important that customers ask, or CISOs ask, their security partners to provide them best practice to ensure that they remain secure based on their business needs, their goals, and their own infrastructures, and that it's not just about privacy in these circumstances. GDPR has underlined the importance of privacy, of course, and how organizations must treat and handle, process and store data. But it's important to remember that these measures will not stop malicious actors, and the appropriate and effective security measures must also be in place, as well as the privacy aspects.
GDPR is not the only new compliance and privacy laws. Similar laws are popping up across the country. What kinds of privacy and compliance issues are at stake when a company is hit by a DNS attack? And also, how can DNS be used to cover other kinds of concurrent attacks a company might be facing? There's an old saying, if you want to break into the back door of a company, drive a truck through the front door. If this is the front door diversion, what should the security teams be looking for concurrently while they're defending against the obvious DNS attack?
Well, again, this really comes back to one of the earlier points that we were talking about, which is around a blended approach to cybersecurity and a mature approach to how we treat, we mitigate, and we visualize the threats within our organizations. But what you're talking about here really relates to the extraction or the exfiltration of sensitive data. And there's no shortage of recent headlines in the press to show that this threat is clear, is present, and is successful. So the implications of losing sensitive or customer data has wide ramifications under privacy laws, for one, but also it risks corporate reputation and profitability as customers potentially lose trust in those damaged brands. And again, we've seen some evidence of that from recent outbreaks that we've seen hitting the mainstream press. Now, criminals are employing more and more sophisticated ways to extract this data. Diversion tactics may be one, and there's no question that, again, a blended approach to cybersecurity is essential to combat these attackers. But the pervasive nature of DNS and the fact it largely flows unobstructed means it can be a very attractive way to extract this data in the first instance from an organization. And it's really one of the main reasons that it's so important that DNS is considered as part of the overall security stack. And that it's wrapped in as part of the overall security postures of the organization, and is one of the tools at hand and disposable for the CISOs.
This is a topic that you and I could probably talk about all day, easily. But unfortunately, we've actually run out of time, and I need to apologize to our listeners. We just didn't have time to get to your questions. However, all of the questions that were submitted will be turned over to Stuart and his team, and they will be able to reach out to you after this event to answer those questions. But as much as I'd love to continue on, we are out of time. This does conclude today's 2020 webcast through the DNS Looking Glass. Again, I'd like to thank Stuart for joining us and all of you for being in the audience. So good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you might be. Thanks for coming and listening. We hope you'll be back again soon.